What's good, Chiefs Kingdom, and welcome back to the Water Boys channel. As today, I'm going to kind of dive into the trading up scenarios that could lead into the NFL draft for the Kansas City Chiefs. But before we do dive into that, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video, as I'm going to keep you up to date on anything Kansas City Chiefs related that you do not want to miss out on. And without further ado, let's jump into these trade up scenarios for the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's kind of interesting because leading up all the way into the draft, and now that we're getting closer and closer and closer to it, opinions start to change and feelings start to change on how you view a player, if you wanted to trade up, if you wanted to trade back, if the Chiefs should focus on receiver round one, or if you change to edge rusher, yada, yada, yada. That's just how it's going to happen because we had a long duration until draft, so your mindset's always going to change, and mine's kind of tweaking there a little bit, but not so. And here's where I'm leaning towards how I feel the Kansas City Chiefs should dive into this draft. So, as everyone does know, we have 2 first-round picks, the 29th and the 30th in the first round. I'm still a big buyer and trading back because of the depth in this draft. But now, here's kind of like, I guess, a catch-22 with it, is I'm going to dive into 5 players in this video to where Kansas City might trade up for just because they could get a star-studded receiver, edge rusher, cornerback, safety that can help solidify this team right away. In the area I'm going to look for most specific is between 10 and 14 range, where it's going to be the Jets, it's going to be the Vikings, it's going to be the Texans, where I think are all viable to trade back because they all want more picks to stockpile and build their team. So that is a very likely scenario. Now you're going to get your fan base to be like, damn, we got all these picks from Tyreek just to trade them away. I'm going to stop that right there because I mentioned all along is I don't see Kansas City keeping 2 first-round picks. So when we get to pick 30, that's where I feel KC could trade back. And what I mean by that is they could trade back from the, like, say, early 30s to the 50 range to get your second-round pick back and then also get another third-round pick. That way, you basically reconciled everything you lost from trading up, and you still got a star player. I would prefer to do that because when you get to the back end of the first round, you're also dealing with a lot of, either low-tier first-round picks going into second-round prospects. So you might as well trade back regardless because the value would be better in the second round. So I'm leaning towards trade up with the one and then trade back with the other and get your picks back. KC can do so many different things in this draft. I'm leaning towards that's the best scenario because you can get a top 15 player and then you can also build your depth from the second round and third round, fourth round. You know how it goes. And that's where Veach tends to excel. Now, let's dive into my top 5 prospects that I think have been falling off draft boards or just sliding down a little bit and I think can be on KC's draft boards. Now, the first couple I'm going to mention I think is a 0% chance Kansas City will trade up, but let's make it fun. It's a hypothetical thing. We're going to have fun with it. At number 5, I got Kyle Hamilton. We all talk about the Daxton Hills, the Lewis Scenes, the Jaquan Briskers, you name them, we've mentioned them at the end of the first, end of the second round. What if KC just went out of their way to trade up, let's say like the 13 to 15 range, because I do feel Kyle Hamilton, he can start sliding, and it's nothing to do with the player or anything like that. I think it's the position, and a lot of people and a lot of teams don't value the safety position as a top 10 position need. Well, let's say KC just wants to snap right in and get a big physical playmaking safety out of Notre Dame and Kyle Hamilton. That would be very interesting. I wouldn't be mad at the pick whatsoever. It's a position of need. You get your 3 safeties out there and you just let them go out and have fun. Like I said, 0% chance it happens because I just don't see it, like I mentioned. It's not a position of need early in the draft. I don't think KC would want to trade a lot of assets to get them. But it would also be a fun scenario to dive in and check out. Now, another really fun scenario that I'm going to give, maybe I'll give it a little more than a 0%. I'll give it a 2% chance that it could happen, is pass rusher out of Oregon, Kvon Thibodeaux. And I know a lot of you are like, KC is not going to trade that far up. And you're right. I don't expect him to trade in the top 5 or anything that crazy. But there's also been reports coming out that Kvon Thibodeaux's stock is falling, which means it doesn't look like he'll be taken within the top 5. let's say by chance he happens to fall at that 10 spot. Now I know Robert Saleh could be a big fan of his because he was a big fan of the way D Ford rushes the passer and how quick he gets in the backfield. He's one of those speed rushers. But let's not forget either, KC had D Ford, and they were a big fan of speed rushers too. So if KC wants the chance to go nab a Kvon Thibodeaux and they can make a deal with the Jets, I would be surprised, but I wouldn't be mad at it either. And it really answers a huge need at pass rusher with the star pass rusher out of Oregon too. And let's not forget too, before this year and even actually coming into this year, Kvon Thibodeaux was the best pass rusher. Now there has been questions about his work antics and how seriously he takes the game, and those are all questions of need. And if Kansas City is really interested, they will have a meeting and they'll dissect from there and feel if they want to go that direction. But like I mentioned, that's a 0% chance it happens. But if Kvon Thibodeaux falls at 10, there's going to be some teams in the back range of the draft be like, should we actually go and jump up and get him? Because that's how it happens with players that, were expected to go very early and they start falling. It gets other teams very interested. And it would be interesting if KC gets interested in that aspect. But like I mentioned, probably no chance, but another fun scenario. Now at number 3, what do I want to give this? I might give this a little more because it's a huge position of need. I'm going to give it a 15% chance. I'm going to go with the cornerback out of LSU, Derek Stingley Jr. This one could be really interesting where KC might not have to trade up so far into the 10-13 range, but his value might be going back up again because he had an excellent pro day. So it's going to be interesting to see how teams reevaluate after that pro day if they feel like Derek Stingley Jr. is that top cornerback. Of course, he's not going to be valued over Sauce Gardner, but is he worth a top 10 pick again? Remember, coming into this draft before the last season started, he was potentially your best player coming into this draft. And then, of course, inconsistent play throughout the year affected him. And then injuries too. And now we're here and we're wondering, is he the same type of player we were going to get 2 years ago? But if he's in that 16, 17 range and you want to make a trade with the Eagles for a top cornerback, I might be all over that. You get a top tier cornerback, and I would do it just because I know he's a playmaker and I know there's questions. But again, it's the same thing with a Kvon Thibodeaux. You go in for a meeting, you find out what the player profile is about, you find out everything he's about, and if he passes everything, you make that trade. KC needs a solid cornerback. It's a young DB group. And KC's they made a questionable call with Marcus Peters, and you could say it didn't work, but it did work because he was a star when he was with KC. Was there some, antics and not even off the field, on the field questions? Yeah. But he was a playmaker, and if you could get a Derek Stingley Jr. for at least 4 to 5 years to be a playmaker in your DB room, I would take that because I still think he's one of the top defensive players in this draft. And if he falls in the 15 range, I'd be all over it. But maybe in KC's aspect, I'll give it a 15% chance. Now these next two I'm going to dive into, I'm starting to lean in KC, and I mentioned it before, might trade up for one of these guys. And it's going to be a high percentile where I think even if they don't trade up, we'll hear reports on KC trying to trade up for this player. I just highly believe in it. At number 2, I got the pass rusher, Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State. He's powerful. He's got speed rush. He's everything KC would look for in a pass rusher. And he is another player where it's going to get very interesting too. And it's just all on, player profile, name, and position of need too. In that top 10 range, he can go to Seattle at 9, and he could fall all the way to the 18 to 20 range. It'd be very interesting to see. Definitely if he's in that 15 to 20 range, I definitely see KC trying to nab him and get a trade there and solidify a huge need at pass rusher too. If it's not Kvon Thibodeaux, it's going to be Jermaine Johnson. They're going to try to make a splash on one of these big name pass rushers. I know it because they didn't really get a splash in free agency. They are basically still kind of depleted. You got Frank Clark coming back. You got Chris Jones at defensive tackle. But on your other end, you still don't really have nothing. I wouldn't be surprised if Jermaine Johnson's name gets called as the Kansas City Chief if the Chiefs trade up. This one, I'm not going to go as high as 50% chance because that's basically, hey, flip a coin, it could happen. But I'll go 45% chance. I think if KC wants to focus on defense in round 1, that's where it's going to be. Now this one, the fun one, basically the sexy pick, the explosive pick, wide receiver, Jameson Williams. You knew he was going to be number 1, and it just feels like a fit. It really does. Now, he looks like he's recovering really quickly. He's coming off of an ACL injury back in the bowl game. So it's going to be something to see. I don't think his stock value is dropping anymore. It's just how high our team's viewing Jameson Williams. Like, now we're hearing reports he might be your number 1 receiver in this draft. Like, it's funny with Drake London and Jameson Williams, after everything that's happened with their injury, Drake London came off pro day. He seems like he's backed up. Jameson Williams, he had a video of him working out after his ACL injury. He's looking like he's on a full recovery. Now you look like it's either Drake London or Jameson Williams, and Garrett Wilson might start sliding. And that's an interesting one too. If Garrett Wilson happens to be your 3rd receiver that hasn't been drafted, I wanted to slide him in this video, and I can see it happen, but I'm going to stick with Jameson Williams here because it just feels like a fit. He had a visit with Kansas City last week too. Like I mentioned, KC, like, as much as they need to improve a defense, they've always been this offense is going to be what wins its games. They're going to have to do anything to protect Mahomes, and they're going to have to do anything to get weapons for Mahomes. I would not be shocked whatsoever. Like I mentioned with the Jermaine Johnson on defense, if they trade up and a defensive player is called, I'm going to guarantee it's Jermaine Johnson. But at a bigger note, it's going to mostly be Jameson Williams because KC, they're going to make sure Mahomes is set for years. And this will be a wide receiver who, 1st-round pick, that means he'll have 5 years at least in Kansas City. And then whatever happens from there, happens from there. But you basically reconnect a fast, speedy duo with Mahomes again. And I'm going to give this one, like, I'm going to go 50. I'm going to go 55% chance. I'm just really liking this right now, and it just feels like that's what's going to happen. I feel like KC's very interested in the player, and I feel like they'll trade up and do what they got to do to get Jameson Williams on the Kansas City Chiefs. And that will basically wrap up my top 5 players. If Kansas City was to trade up, I think they would be interested in. Now, let's rewind a little bit because I know what the comment section is going to be filled with. It's like, man, KC should not trade those picks, and that's not going to happen. There's 2 things with this, though, guys, and you got to realize KC's not drafting 12 players in this draft. It's just not going to happen. Like, there's no way. It's nice to project. It's nice to have simulators. It's nice to have mock drafts. I just don't see it happening. That's going to be very, very slim chance. And also, too, if we're going to be fully open-minded with it, this would be the first time in Veach era that he rarely has a 1st-round pick. So you really think he's going to use both of them? No. So that's where I think he's going to get the most out of that 29th pick and trade up. And then when we get to 30, there's not really any like great solidified pass rushers that should be there. Like I told you, I'm not sold on a Mafe. Now if a George Karlaftis falls there, then hell, that's amazing. But I don't know if he'll fall that far. Receivers start plucking off the board. And do you really want to invest in like a Christian Watkins at a 30th or a Sky Moore or George Pickens when you might be able to get them in the mid-30s, early 40s? That's what that value of that 30 pick can be. You could trade with someone in that range and then gain a 3rd-round pick. I think I'm starting to like this scenario a lot more where they make the most out of the 29th pick and trade up, and then you trade back in an early 2nd round and get a 3rd-round pick, and then it makes up for everything. It's like you really didn't lose much. But let me know, Chiefs Kingdom, in the comments down below how you're feeling about these trade scenarios. I know a lot of people don't want to trade up, but let me know how you're feeling about trading up, or if you want to keep the picks, or hey, trade back and get more value where it can be. I'm leaning towards, I just don't feel like KC is keeping all 12 picks, so you might as well find different ways to make the best out of this draft. I think this is one way you can do it. But before I do close out this video, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, as I will keep you up to date on anything Kansas City Chief related. And don't forget to hit that big thumbs up and give me that like. Thank you guys. Thanks for checking in. I am checking out. Y'all enjoy your day.